I found out my son bought a $4 million mansion from the society pages of the Chicago Tribune. Not from a phone call, not from a text. From a newspaper article that my neighbor Linda brought over with her morning coffee, pointing at the photo with a shaking finger and asking if that was my David. It was him, Dr. David Mitchell, renowned cardiologist, standing in front of a sprawling estate in Lake Forest with his wife Vanessa and her parents, the Rothschilds. The caption read, Dr. Mitchell, son of the late Robert Mitchell and Catherine Rothschild Mitchell, celebrates new family home. I was sitting right there in my living room, very much alive, very much not dead. That's when I knew what I had to do. I walked to my desk, pulled out the folder I'd kept for 15 years, and found the loan documents, $240,000 in student loans, co-signed by me, still being paid off. I picked up the phone and called the bank, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. David was born in 1989, 3 weeks early, while I was working a double shift at the steel mill in Gary, Indiana. My wife Margaret called me at work, her voice tight with pain, telling me it was time. I ran out of that plant so fast, I left my lunchbox behind. By the time I got to the hospital, she was already in labor, and 2 hours later, I was holding my son. He had Margaret's eyes and my stubborn chin. I looked at him and promised myself he'd have a better life than I did. Margaret was a secretary at an insurance company. I was a floor supervisor at the mill. Together, we made decent money, enough for a small house in Hammond, a used car, and a savings account we contributed to religiously. Every Friday, after depositing our paychecks, we'd put $50 into that account, sometimes $100 if we'd had a good week. It was David's future. That's what we called it. David was a smart kid. Not just smart, brilliant. His kindergarten teacher pulled us aside and said she'd never seen a 5-year-old read like that. By 3rd grade, he was doing 5th grade math. By middle school, he was taking high school classes. His guidance counselor told us to start thinking about college early. Good colleges. Expensive colleges. That's when Margaret started taking on extra work. She'd do bookkeeping for small businesses on weekends. I took every overtime shift the mill offered. We stopped eating out, stopped taking vacations. That savings account grew. 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. We were so proud. David got into Northwestern for his undergraduate degree, pre-med. The acceptance letter came in the spring of 2007, and Margaret cried when she opened it. Happy tears, scared tears. The tuition was more than I made in a year. But we had the savings, and David got some financial aid. And I picked up a second job on weekends doing maintenance work at an apartment complex. I remember driving him to Evanston that first day. Margaret sat in the back with boxes of his things, her hand on his shoulder the whole drive. We helped him move into his dorm, a tiny room he shared with a kid from Connecticut whose father was a hedge fund manager. The roommate's side of the room had a new laptop, a mini fridge, and a TV. David's side had the desk lamp from his bedroom and his clothes in plastic bins. But he didn't care. He was happy. He was going to be a doctor. Those 4 years, I worked 70 hours a week, sometimes 80. The mill and the apartment complex, and whatever other odd jobs I could find. Margaret kept doing bookkeeping, but she started getting tired more easily. She'd fall asleep on the couch at 8 p.m. I told her to slow down, but she wouldn't. David needs us, she'd say. He came home for Christmas his sophomore year, and he'd changed. Still our David, but different. He talked about his friends, their families, their summer homes in Wisconsin and Michigan. He mentioned someone named Vanessa, a girl he'd met who was also pre-med, whose father owned a pharmaceutical company. He seemed embarrassed when I picked him up in my old Ford pickup, asked me to drop him off a block from the dorm. Margaret noticed too. She didn't say anything to David, but she said it to me. He's growing up, she told me, finding his place in the world. I wanted to believe that's all it was. Spring semester of his junior year, Margaret found the lump. She didn't tell me right away. She kept it to herself for 2 months before she finally went to the doctor. By then, it was stage 3 breast cancer. Aggressive. The oncologist recommended immediate treatment. Chemotherapy, radiation, possible mastectomy. I called David that night. He was in the middle of studying for exams. I told him about his mother, about the cancer, about the treatment plan. There was a long pause on the line. Then he said, "Dad, I have organic chemistry finals in 3 days. I can't come home right now. Tell Mom I'll call her this weekend." He didn't call that weekend, or the next. Margaret started treatment in April. I took a leave of absence from the mill. We'd saved enough for David's remaining undergrad costs, but now we needed money for treatment. Our insurance covered some, but not all. The co-pays were hundreds of dollars per session. I went through our savings. Then I took out a loan against the house. David graduated in June 2011. We were supposed to go to the ceremony. Margaret wanted to go, despite being in the middle of chemo. She'd lost all her hair by then, wore scarves and hats. She bought a new dress, navy blue, and I ironed my one good suit. We drove to Evanston the day before, got a hotel room we couldn't afford. The morning of graduation, David called. "Dad, listen, the ceremony is really crowded. Limited seating. I only got 2 tickets, and Vanessa's parents flew in from Connecticut. Maybe you and Mom could watch it online? They're live streaming it." Margaret's face crumbled. I told David we'd already driven up. We were in a hotel 2 miles from campus. He got quiet. Then he said, "I'm sorry. I should have told you earlier. Vanessa's father is a major donor to the medical school I'm applying to. I need to make a good impression." We watched it on my laptop in that hotel room. Margaret held my hand and cried silently. We saw David walk across the stage, shake hands with the dean, smile for the camera. We saw him hug Vanessa and her parents afterward. We saw him laugh and celebrate with his friends. Then we drove home. David got into Columbia Medical School that fall. Full tuition was $65,000 a year, plus living expenses in New York City. The financial aid package covered some. He had some scholarships, but there was still a gap, a big gap, about $60,000 per year, times 4 years. He called me in August. "Dad, I need you to co-sign on some student loans. The bank won't give them to me without a co-signer, with steady employment and good credit." I'd just gone back to work at the mill. Margaret was still in treatment. The cancer hadn't responded as well as the doctors hoped. Our savings were gone. The house loan was maxed out. But this was David's dream. This was what we'd worked for. I co-signed. $240,000 in federal and private student loans. The banker looked at me over her glasses and said, "You understand you're legally responsible for this debt if he defaults?" I signed anyway. Margaret died in February of David's first year of medical school. The cancer had metastasized to her lungs and liver. The end came fast. I called David on a Tuesday to tell him the doctors said it was time that he should come home. He said he had anatomy lab practical exams on Thursday. "I can't miss it, Dad. It's 30% of my grade. Mom would understand. She'd want me to focus on school." I sat by her bed alone for 3 days, held her hand, told her stories about when we first met, about the day David was born, about all the good years we had. She died on Friday morning, just as the sun was coming up. David called that evening. When I told him, he was quiet. Then he said he'd try to come for the funeral. He came. Arrived an hour before the service, wearing an expensive black suit I'd never seen before. Vanessa was with him, her parents too. They sat in the back of the church. After the burial, David hugged me, told me he was sorry, that he'd call soon. Then they left to catch a flight back to New York. He didn't call soon, or at all, really. Maybe once every few months. 5-minute conversations. "How are you?" "I'm fine. How's school?" "Busy." That was it. I kept working at the mill. The house felt empty. I'd make coffee in the morning and set out 2 cups, then remember. I'd cook dinner and make too much, then remember. I'd turn on the TV in the evening just to have noise, just to not feel so alone. David graduated from medical school in 2015. I got an invitation to the ceremony, but not a call. I couldn't afford to fly to New York anyway. I sent a card with a $100 check, all I could spare. He texted back, "Thanks, Dad." That was it. He did his residency in cardiology at Massachusetts General in Boston. 3 years. I heard from him maybe twice. Once to tell me he'd gotten engaged to Vanessa and once to tell me they'd gotten married at her parents' estate in Connecticut. Small ceremony, family only. I wasn't invited. I didn't make a fuss. What was I going to do? He was busy. He was building his career. He was in love. These things happen. I told myself he'd come around eventually. That once he settled down, once life got less hectic, we'd reconnect. In 2019, I got pneumonia. Bad pneumonia. I was in the hospital for 11 days. Oxygen mask, IV antibiotics, the works. The doctors were worried it might develop into sepsis. My neighbor Linda called David, found his number in my phone. She told him his father was in intensive care. He said he'd try to visit. He never came, never called the hospital. I found out later, from his Instagram, that Linda showed me that he'd been in Chicago that same week for a medical conference, 45 minutes from Hammond. He didn't stop by. I survived, got released from the hospital, went to physical therapy to rebuild my strength. Linda checked on me every day, brought me groceries, drove me to appointments. She was a godsend. I didn't tell her that I'd stopped expecting David to show up. I'd already mourned that loss. Life continued. I retired from the mill in 2020 with a modest pension and Social Security. Enough to live on, pay bills, keep the house. I started working part-time at a hardware store just to stay busy. Made friends with the guys there, went fishing on weekends, joined a bowling league. I was okay. Not happy, maybe, but okay. The loan payments kept coming. Every month, $240,000 at 6% interest meant I was paying about $1,500 monthly. David was supposed to make the payments, but he'd miss several. The bank would call me. I'd send in what I could. Some months, I'd short my grocery budget to make the payment, but I didn't want to default. Didn't want to ruin the credit I'd spent a lifetime building. Then came that morning in October 2024. Linda knocked on my door at 7 a.m. with the newspaper and her phone. The Tribune had a whole spread in their real estate section about Lake Forest's newest mansion sale. $4 million. Historic property, recently renovated, purchased by prominent cardiologist Dr. David Mitchell and his wife, Vanessa Rothschild Mitchell. There he was in the photo. My son, standing in front of stone gates and a circular driveway, arms around a blonde woman, flanked by an older couple I assumed were her parents. Everyone smiling. Everyone dressed like they'd stepped out of a catalog. But it was the caption that killed me. Dr. Mitchell, son of the late Robert Mitchell and Catherine Rothschild Mitchell. Catherine Rothschild Mitchell. That was Vanessa's mother's name. I found that out later. But first, there was that word, late, as in dead. As in, I didn't exist anymore. As in, I'd been erased. Linda was asking if it was a mistake, if maybe there was another David Mitchell, but I knew. I'd seen the pictures on his sparse social media over the years, few as they were. I knew his face. I knew that was him. I asked Linda to leave, told her I needed time to think. She hugged me, squeezed my hand, left reluctantly. I sat in my living room for 3 hours, just staring at that newspaper photo. My son, the boy I'd worked 80-hour weeks for. The boy whose education cost me everything. The boy whose mother died, still believing he'd come around. He'd told people I was dead. It was easier that way, I suppose. Easier than explaining the father in Hammond, the factory worker, the co-signer, still making loan payments. Easier to be the son of wealthy Catherine Rothschild than the son of Robert Mitchell from the steel mill. I thought about calling him. Thought about driving up to Lake Forest and knocking on those stone gates. Thought about doing nothing. Just accepting this final abandonment. Then I went to my desk and pulled out the loan documents. Co-signed February 2012. Current balance, $187,000. Still 14 years of payments remaining. I called the bank, asked to speak to someone about my loans, got transferred 3 times before reaching a supervisor named Patricia. I explained the situation, that I was the co-signer, that the primary borrower was my son, that he'd been missing payments, that I'd been covering them. Patricia pulled up the account. Mr. Mitchell, you're listed as co-signer, which makes you equally responsible for the debt. However, we typically contact the primary borrower first for missed payments. I understand, I said. But here's what I want to know. If I demand full payment, can I do that? Silence on the line. Then, sir, these are installment loans. They're meant to be paid over time. I understand that. But if I'm the co-signer and I want to accelerate the payment, can I notify you and make it due immediately? More silence. Typing. Then, let me transfer you to our legal department. 20 minutes and 2 more transfers later, I had my answer. As co-signer, I couldn't demand payment myself, but I could stop making payments, let the account go into default, and then the bank would demand full payment from David. Or I could contact David directly and tell him I wouldn't be making any more payments, that he needed to take full responsibility immediately. Neither option was clean, but the second one was faster. I hung up and called David's number. It went to voicemail. Of course it did. I hadn't heard his voice in over 2 years. I left a message. David, it's your father. I saw the announcement about your new house. Congratulations. I also saw that I'm apparently dead. That's news to me, since I'm pretty sure I'm still breathing. But here's the thing. I've been making payments on your $240,000 student loans for the past 12 years. $1,500 a month, give or take. I'm done. Effective immediately. The loans are your responsibility. The bank will be contacting you about bringing the account current and setting up new payment arrangements. Oh, and one more thing. Don't call me again. Since I'm dead and all, it wouldn't make much sense. I hung up. My hands were shaking. I'd never done anything like that in my life. Never stood up for myself. Never demanded anything. Never walked away. But I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. The phone rang. 15 minutes later. David. I let it ring. It rang again an hour later. And again that evening, he left voicemails. I deleted them without listening. The next day, I got a text. Dad, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. I didn't respond. Another text. The newspaper made a mistake. They got the information wrong. Another. Please call me back. I can explain. Another. This is crazy. You can't just stop paying the loans. We had an agreement. That one almost made me laugh. Agreement. I texted back once. Find the email or letter where I agreed to keep paying while you pretended I was dead. I'll wait. Then I blocked his number. 3 days later, the bank called. Patricia again. Mr. Mitchell, we've been contacted by David Mitchell regarding the student loan account. He's requesting to assume full responsibility for the debt but needs time to arrange financing. He's asking if you'd be willing to continue making payments for 90 days while he secures a loan modification. No, I said. Sir, if the account goes into default, then it goes into default. That's his problem now, not mine. Mr. Mitchell, I understand you're upset, but this will damage your credit score as well. I'm 70 years old. I own my house. I don't need credit. Let it default if he doesn't pay. I'm done. I hung up. The calls kept coming from the bank, from debt collection agencies David must have hired. I told them all the same thing. Not my problem anymore. Linda told me Vanessa's parents were calling around Hammond, trying to reach me. They wanted to discuss the situation. I told Linda to tell them I had nothing to discuss. 4 weeks after I left that voicemail, I got a certified letter from David's lawyer. It was a formal request that I continue making loan payments as per my contractual obligation as co-signer, and threatening legal action if I continued to refuse. I took the letter to a lawyer myself, a guy from church who did elder law. He read it and shook his head. They can't force you to pay. You're not refusing to honor the loan. You're simply unable to continue payments. That's not illegal. The bank's recourse is against David, not you. What about my credit? I asked. He shrugged. It'll take a hit, but you're retired, you own your home, you don't need to borrow money. It'll recover eventually. More importantly, they're bluffing. They don't want this to go to court because it looks terrible. Wealthy doctor lets his working-class father pay his student loans? No jury would sympathize with that. I wrote back to the lawyer. 1 sentence. Tell your client to pay his own bills. Thanksgiving came and went. Christmas, too. I spent them with Linda and her family. They'd become my family, really. Her grandkids called me Uncle Rob. We had dinner together on Sundays. I helped her son fix his car. This was what family was supposed to be. In January, I found out David had taken out a home equity line of credit against his Lake Forest mansion to pay off the student loans. It took him 3 months, but he finally did it. The bank sent me a notification that the loans were paid in full, and my cosigner obligation was released. I felt nothing. No relief, no vindication, nothing. It was just over. Then in March, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Dad?" David's voice. Older, tired. I almost hung up, but something made me stay on the line. "What do you want?" I said. "I wanted to tell you I paid off the loans. You're free and clear. No more obligations." "I know." The bank notified me. Silence. Then, "Dad, about the newspaper thing." "Don't." It was Vanessa's mother. She told the reporter that. I didn't know she was going to say that. By the time I saw the article, it was already published. "You didn't correct it." More silence. "Did you tell them I was dead, David? Did you tell your wife's family I was dead?" It's complicated. It's yes or no." A long pause. Then, quietly, "They asked about my family early on, when Vanessa and I first started dating. I said my mother had passed. They asked about my father. I said you'd passed too. It was easier than explaining. Everything." "Explaining what? That I'm a factory worker? That I'm from Hammond? That I'm not good enough for the Rothschilds?" "Dad, that's not. You pretended I was dead for 6 years because you were embarrassed." "I'm sorry." "No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry I stopped paying your loans. You're sorry there were consequences. But you're not sorry for what you did." "Dad, please. Can we meet? Can we talk about this?" "Why? So you can explain it away? So you can make yourself feel better?" "There's nothing to talk about, David. You made your choice a long time ago. You chose Vanessa's family over me. You chose her money over your mother's memory. You chose a $4 million house over the man who co-signed the loans that made your career possible. That's not fair. You want to know what's not fair? Your mother dying alone because you couldn't miss an exam. Me in the ICU with pneumonia while you were in Chicago for a conference and couldn't spare an hour to visit. 12 years of loan payments while you bought a mansion and told people I was dead. That's what's not fair. I want to make this right. You can't. There's no making this right. You can't bring back the time you stole. You can't undo the lies. You can't resurrect the father you killed off to impress your in-laws. Dad, I'm not your dad anymore. I haven't been for a long time. I was just a bank account to you, a co-signer, a problem to be managed and eventually erased. Well, congratulations. You succeeded. I don't exist to you. And now, you don't exist to me. Please don't do this. I'm not doing anything. I'm just accepting what's already true. Have a nice life, David. Or don't. I honestly don't care anymore." I hung up. Blocked that number too. Linda asked me later if I regretted it. Cutting him off completely, refusing to reconcile. She said he was still my son. That family was forever. That maybe with time he'd change. I told her the truth. David stopped being my son the day he decided I wasn't good enough for his new life. I'd spent years grieving that loss, mourning the boy who used to hug me goodnight and tell me he loved me and promise he'd take care of me when I got old. That boy was gone. Had been gone for years. I'd just finally accepted it. The man on the phone, the one who bought mansions and married into wealthy families and lied about his father being dead? I didn't know him, and I didn't want to. People think you have to forgive family, that blood is thicker than water, that you owe your children something just because you brought them into the world. But I don't believe that anymore. You don't owe anyone who disrespects you, dismisses you, uses you, and discards you. Not even your son, especially not your son. I'm 71 now. I still work part-time at the hardware store. Still go bowling on Tuesdays. Still have dinner with Linda's family on Sundays. Her grandson Tommy is applying to colleges now. He wants to study engineering. Smart kid. Reminds me a little of David at that age. Except Tommy says thank you and calls me just to talk, and helped me fix my roof last summer without being asked. I told Tommy I'd help him with college if he needs it, not co-signing loans. I learned that lesson, but I've got a little money saved up, a few thousand. It's his if he wants it, because that's what you do for people who value you, who respect you, who remember you exist. The other day, I was sorting through old photos, found one of David's high school graduation. He's wearing his cap and gown, standing between me and Margaret, all of us grinning. He's got his arms around both of us. Margaret's wearing that yellow dress she loved. I'm in my mill uniform because I'd come straight from work. I almost threw it away. But I didn't. I put it in a box in the garage with the rest of the past. Maybe someday I'll be able to look at it without feeling anything. Maybe someday it'll just be a photo of 3 people who used to know each other. But not yet. Linda says I seem happier now, lighter. She's probably right. There's something freeing about letting go of people who don't want to be held, about accepting loss instead of fighting it, about choosing your own peace over someone else's convenience. David sent a Christmas card this year. No return address, just a generic card with a photo of him and Vanessa and their new baby. A daughter, Emma Catherine Mitchell, named after Vanessa's mother and my Margaret, hedging his bets, I guess, trying to rewrite history again. I threw it away. Some people would say I'm bitter. Maybe I am. But I'm also free. Free from hoping he'll change. Free from making excuses for him. Free from pretending everything's okay when it's not. Free from being erased. I earned that freedom. It cost me 12 years of loan payments, a lifetime of work, and a son. But I'd pay it again, because my dignity is worth more than his guilt. My peace is worth more than his comfort. And my life, this life I've built with people who actually care whether I'm alive or dead, is worth more than any relationship with someone who wishes I wasn't. That's the truth. It's not a happy ending. It's not what you're supposed to say. But it's the truth. And I can live with that.